Hello, everyone. We're so thrilled that you are here joining us today. So, my name is Anu Mandapati, and we have a great panel for you today. We'll be talking about the art of co-creation and collaboration. And we'd love for you to co-create this session with us. And so we'd love to hear your comments throughout and have a very engaged dialogue. Very soon, we're going to have our other panelists joining us, and we'll do a quick intro to all of them as well. All right, welcome everyone. So what I'd love to do is I'm stepping in a little bit into the moderator role until our moderator joins us. So what I'd love for the three of you, and then I'll do my intro as well at the end, is tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wanted to be on this panel. So Carrie, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll just go to the rest of the group. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and why did you say that you wanted to be on this panel?
Hey, Anu, nice to have you, and thank you for stepping in. Flexibility is great all the time. I'll share a little about me, and then I'll contextualize why I think being here mattered. I have been in the people space for 30 odd years, but specifically really in how do people make business outcomes come to life, primarily in the tech space. So I've worked for SAP for 18 years. I was a customer for 12 years in another software company. And so tech is certainly part of it, but I'm not techie. I'm a people person. And so my role is really looking at how technology comes to life in organizations. Not the one I'm in, but the people that the software is being purchased by and they're investing in. So this topic actually for me is very much how I've spent a lot of my career, looking at how do you collaborate when you're looking at people and business together, or people and everyone together. But in particular, as I think about the HR audience or the HR stakeholder group, how do they become not just in service to the organization, but really a leader? And I'll take this one step further. There was a research paper done probably 10 years ago now, and it was done by Accenture, looking at what % of the time does the CEO reach to their senior executives for advice on strategic topics or transformations, et cetera. And number one was their CFO, because can we afford to do it? Number two is really looking at their COO. Can we execute against it? Then they got into sales, and can we find customers to support it? Then they got to IT, and 24% was the chief people officer, or CHRO was really the term at the time. And so often that group is really okay, we figured it all out. Now, can you go do the bits we need from you? Versus flip that on its side. Anything that you want to do comes to life when people do it. So to me, this is really a conversation of how does HR become and move further up that pipe. And if I look frankly at IT, which I'm super familiar with too, IT used to be okay, we figured it all out. Can you go turn on the wires and things? And IT's really become an innovator. They are part of the discussion on what could we be doing. You look right now at generative AI, everyone's figuring out with their IT partner, what could we be doing? I think frankly with the change of COVID brought HR into the room in a different way than it had been for a long time. And so when I think about now, how do we keep collaborating? That's why I'm here. So thank you.
Wonderful. Great to have you here.
Amazing. Thank you, Carrie. And thank you, Anu. Great to be here with you and our audience. Some address. I have not been as long as Carrie, not 30 years for me, probably about 20 odd here for me in the HR space. I'm currently at a tech startup running everything from people ops to total rewards to analytics, and I've spent a lot of time in the finance industry, Bank of America, tech with Facebook and other businesses as well. I think Carrie's covered it very well, right? All I'm gonna say is that, if I had $1 every time someone in HR said we want a seat at the table, right, I'd be rich by now and I would not be joining you here, right, at this. So I think it's time to move beyond that conversation, right? How do we get a seat at the table, right? And it's time to practically understand how to do it, right? And I think today's discussion, even if we contribute just that tiny little bit for our HR partners to understand how to be a proper stakeholder, then I think we've done our bit for today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here as well. So I head up global DEI, employee experience, as well as culture within my organization. And so for me, when I think about co-creation and I think about collaboration, what excites me the most is I look at the opportunities where I've had the best success, and it was always co created. So I came in as a partner, not as a consultant telling someone what to do. So I think the more that we focus on the partnership aspect of it and we co create solutions together, we're going to increase connection. We increase collaboration and we increase trust, and that's how we're able to have better impact. And so that's why I get so excited. So Carrie and Andreas, I'm curious for both of you, when I say co-creation, what comes to mind for you?
I'll jump in, and I couldn't echo even more, Andreas. I totally agree. Like, what do you do other than saying we want to play well together? How do you actually play well together? Some things to me, like I will often say to a leadership group, like, what's your business roadmap? Where are you headed? What's your technology roadmap to support that? But what's your people roadmap? Who's going to be working for you the next 1, 3, 5 years as you try to get the outcomes you want in the next 1, 3, 5 years? So to me, when I think of co-creation, it is, those decisions on where a business is going are being had. Those conversations are being had. And so if I look at co-creation, it's, are you part of the creation or are you part of consuming the output of that? And if you're consuming the output, you weren't a co-creator. You need to be participating, contributing. So if I look at active things to do, be an active participant in the business planning cycle. Often HR isn't necessarily invited. If you're not invited, invite yourself, get invited, be there. To begin with, it might be a bit of a learning curve. So there's going to be some degree of conversation that, frankly, you don't need to know. And like when I sit in a room, if I take the tech space, I'll sit in a room where we're talking about tech. There's a bunch that's kind of like it waves over me, and I don't really need to know functionally how a system's going to work. And for me, my litmus test that I listen to is, how do people's jobs change? So there can be a whole bunch of stuff on testing and configuration and all that. I don't care. But what I care is, well, what does it do to people's jobs? And so same thing, there's an element of time investment that you make where you hear some content that you can help with, but it allows you at the right moment to jump in and say what you need to say. So what comes to mind when I think about co-creation is being there. And then as that roadmap is being outlined, knowing, what is it that we have no different to if I look at an organization that manufactures something? What's the capacity for manufacturing that we have? Or if I look at an organization for sales, what's the capacity for coverage that can have for accounts? Well, what's the capacity we have for people? What's the talent? What's the capability? What are the number of resources? What's our turnover that's expected? What's our attrition that's expected based on retirement? The same capacity planning. And this is kind of counter to the caring about purpose, which I'm not parking. I'm not saying doesn't matter. All of that matters deeply, because if you don't have all that, then you don't have those people because they leave. So all the conversations we have in Hacking HR about how to keep people engaged and keep them connected and build a great employee, I'm in all that for all that too. This is also, though, if you're doing that, you have resources to bring to bear. And so in this, you're a business manager bringing assets and resources, just like the person who's talking about machines and buildings and other assets that your business needs to manage and balance. And so that co-creation to me is, if we want to going to do growth in our business, what's our capacity planning from a production standpoint? Same thing. What's our capacity planning from a people standpoint? We have enough, we don't have enough, we need to build the following capabilities, skills, which comes back to how do you build and grow people and talent. But all of that to me is co-creation of thinking about how does that happen. And then it's a shared plan. That shared plan is, how do we develop and enable the organization to execute against those needs? And that allows you to actively say, well, we need to develop the following to do that. So some of the things that if you ask for development dollars in an HR only context without connecting it to those business needs, it feels like an expense, versus it's an investment if it's something that's going to bring growth to life. If you want to go into a new business area and you need new skills or new talent, bringing all of that in time in that conversation, when the conversation is about the business changes, allows you to articulate that in context in a much different way than if the decision's made and you're looking at how to fulfill against it. So those are some of the things for me that come to mind. But Andreas, I'd love to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I think we've got Zach as well, so I'll let Zach introduce himself in a minute. But yeah, I'm gonna follow Kerry. Kerry's covered what co-creation collaboration is beautifully, so I'm not actually gonna add anything to that. What I'll instead do is I flip it around, and I'll say what it's not, right? Because very often we, especially in HR, we get confused, right, with some other C words. And there's three that come to mind, right? So for me, collaboration is not just communication, right? A lot of people think collaboration is communication, and communication is about exchanging information, right? I tell you something, you tell me something, right? That's pretty basic, right? Collaboration takes it a step further. Collaboration takes that information and creates something new, right? So that's a piece that often is missing. And from an HR perspective, we are quite communicative, right? We're good at communication. We will communicate what's happening in the business. But is that enough, right? Are we offering any new information beyond pure communication? The other thing we're very good at as HR is collaboration is not coordination, right? We're also very good at coordinating. I've got an ops background, right? I love my processes in HR. But coordination is very, very process driven, right? Collaboration for me is spontaneous, right? Is come in a room, right, and break things instead of making things, right? So first break and then make them again into something better, right? And I think again, and I've seen this, maybe Kerry and Zach, you've seen as well, a lot of times us in HR, we like putting processes in place, and then the business who seeks spontaneity says, "Oh, right, I'm not going to talk to HR, right? Because they're just going to say no, right? Or they're going to like tell me that you need to follow a process." Right? And the last one, the last C, I think for me also is consensus, right? So collaboration is not consensus, right? Again, we're very good in HR of trying to keep everyone happy, right? Bring everyone together, right? Being the empathic voice in the room, right? Which we're always seen as that, okay, well, HR has the soft skills, they'll fix it. Well, no, right? I think we also need to understand there's differences, right? Bring that diversity, encourage that diversity in any room where collaboration happens. And again, encourage that conflict even in the room for that proper collaboration to happen. So, ironically, in a sense, right, we in HR are good on some of the other C's, like the communication, the coordination, the consensus, but not on the collaboration piece. So passing over to you, Zach, as well. Any thoughts? And
Yeah, Zach, we'd love for you to introduce yourself, and then if you could share a little bit about what co-creation means to you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Anu. And apologies for the tardiness here. I thought I had everything set up. Technology decided not to work with me today, but pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Zach Kang, pronouns he, him. I'm a senior DEI advisor at Vanguard, and I joined nearly a year ago, actually, in a few weeks here. And co-creation to me really means a lot of things. I think what it really means for the context of my role and my job is really about strategic influencing in the sense of how do we kind of think about HR and the business as strategic partners versus a lot of times HR is seen as support or logistics or kind of implementing certain processes, protocols to ensure there is consistent services, shared services across the enterprise. And I think more and more you see now HR is seen as a strategic advisor on how to influence business. And so when I think about co-creation from a business standpoint, it's exactly that. It's being very strategic with all of the support infrastructure and architecting different ways in order to meet certain business objectives. So that's what I think about co-creation in the context of HR and different business units.
And Zach, thank you so much for saying that, because that actually leads me to my next question. So, Carrie, you just talked about having a seat at the table, and Zach, you just talked about HR being seen as that support function, but really shifting that mindset. How do we help the organization understand that we're not a support function, we're actually an enablement function? So we're ensuring that we are translating our people strategy to meet our business objectives. How do we help people have that shift so everything that HR does, the people team does, is actually commercially aligned, and they see us as true partners and not just, people on the side, there to help every once in a while if we need to tap into them. So what can we do to ensure that that is how we're being seen?
I'll jump in, and I'd challenge you, Anu, that enablement is a different word for helper. So I don't even know that I want to pick that word, by that partner for sure. But if I look at, I was thinking about it as you were talking, Andreas, in what do you bring? So, for example, I was talking to an organization, this is now probably 3 or 4 years ago, and they knew that 25% of their leadership team was going to be retiring in the next 2 years. That's a data point that when you're doing business planning matters deeply. So the kind of information that HR can bring around what is like what dynamics, what influences, what variables are going to have an impact on the trajectory of those business and commercial needs, bringing that like coming prepared as this is the information I have, no different to whatever product you sell or whatever items you make, to say this is what we see in terms of the pricing of shipments, this is what we see in terms of the market demands from the customer marketplace, this is what our competitive information is, coming with the same kind of data around here's who we have, here's what they do, here's the spend we have to develop them, here's the turnover we expect to have, here's the training requirements we're going to have to invest. So coming with the same business mindset, which can feel conflictual to the DE&I, if you will, feeling loved, wanted, supported, all of those things that are also part of the communication and the collaboration and the consensus that we build and the connection and the culture, all of those things that reside within HR. But in this dialogue, it's coming with your business hat on. And so to me, it's thinking about when and where, like knowing what is the business cycle for your organization. So right now we're in February. Everyone if you're on a fiscal year, everyone did their planning starting in October. They looked at what their targets are going to be. They've launched them in January. They're really getting them settled. They're getting some new hire stuff in place. Headcount's finally being released now for Q1, maybe into Q2. There's a ton of hiring now. Everyone will kind of quiet down by summer. We'll navigate through summer when people are doing things with kids and what have you. There's sporadic activity, and then we'll start to ramp up again in the fall and repeat. Like every company is basically on the same kind of cycle. And you look at the sales cycle that goes with that. And for HR, then there's how does comp fit in, or how does hiring fit in, or when does training fit in? But back to all of that, we know those cycles. So where do we sit? And when are we in those conversations? So those planning conversations that are the October, November cycle, are we in the where are we going as a business conversation? Or are we in the how do we make it happen conversation? So it is, to me, that first piece of when we prepare for and bring data that can influence the direction of the organization, then we can be commercially aligned, and then we can support exactly what you asked for, Anu, and we are not the enabler. We are a side-by-side partner, because without us, it's not happening. If I look at people, process, technology, a process is a great idea. Technology makes it happen, enables it. That enables it. People are what really bring it to life. You can have a great idea and you can have tech, but if people can't do it, it doesn't happen. Over to Zach. Let's change, or Andreas, you're off mute. Go to you.
No, sorry. As I said, I'm a process guy. So if we started clockwise, I'm gonna keep it going clockwise unless Zach jumps in. I wanted to follow up because the data you bring, is data is my one and true love, right? So I think you're absolutely right? Again, I'm gonna spin it around. You've covered the business end of data, and I love those points. Like come in understanding the business. I'm gonna also spin it around and say, also don't be afraid of using the pure things that actually sit in HR, right, to come to those meetings as an equal partner. So I'm going to give a very, 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 very clear example here, right? Usually in many organizations, HR owns performance management, right? We own it, we run the performance cycles, etc. Right? When have we ever put in or discussed with our CEO, etc., to say, okay, in our performance measurements, we need to have co-creation and a collaboration as a data point to measure each manager, right? we need to measure that. We need to make sure that our managers' salaries, right, their comp, their increases year on year depends on that, right? Because to be able to do proper co-creation, to be able to motivate and reward this collaboration, like for me, it's vital to establish performance measurement. How do we measure that? How do we measure co-creation and collaboration within a business? And who best to do that, to come to the table and do that than HR, right? Since we already own the process, right? We understand, right, what goes into a lot of the performance KPIs or OKRs, whatever you call them in the organization, right? Do that and suggest that. Come in and say, okay, well, we want to measure that. We want to measure team and individual performance, not just by pure financial numbers, but also how your team does co-creation, how your team does continuous learning. How? I'm not going to answer that right now. I've got my own ideas, but it can be something as basic as how many sprints does it take to do a project, right? If it takes you 10 sprints for something that should have really on paper taken 2, you need to look at co-creation. Are you communicating properly, right? How many meetings do you do, right, as a manager every time to get something done? This is just simple. I'm just throwing things out there, right? But for me, like defining and building those capabilities for co-creation, right, it's something that sits naturally within HR as well. So let's not ignore our natural resources, in addition to everything that Kerry said around understanding the business properly, right, to influence. Sorry, Zach, forgot to throw it over to
any
you.
thoughts? That's okay. Yeah, I'm here. So Zach, any thoughts
No
that you'd
worries.
like to share?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I agree with all of that that Carrie and Andreas shared. I think the only thing I would add, right, is from a cultural standpoint. When we think about high performing businesses, often it's by employee engagement and employee sentiment, right? And a lot of our enablement function is really how do we develop our leaders to become better leaders, right? And so when I think about how we enable all of that, we are co-creating, team culture and leadership opportunities for employees across the enterprise, and how are we, creating programs and development opportunities and all sorts of things that really help excel and accelerate the performance and the outcomes of the businesses. And a lot of that is driven by the data that Andreas mentioned, right? It also involves a lot of kind of ideating around what the business goals are, and I think it's incumbent upon us, and it benefits our strategic objectives to influence the business to become well versed in their businesses, right, using their nomenclature and their vernacular. So if you're in marketing, use marketing terminology, and even laddering up to what their KPIs and OKRs are for the marketing function, right? So how do you blend all of those different things together such that when you do come to the table with a set of recommendations, solutions on team culture or performance or assessments and things like that, it's really how do you bring all those things together such that the marketing function or whatever function you're supporting, your stakeholder groups understand the same language, right? You're speaking the same language, and I think that's so important and part of this collaboration effort to kind of enable further success into the businesses.
I just want to jump in for a second, Anu, on that. I think this too also is when does this occur, and what relationships do you have with those business leaders? What relationship do you, at whatever level you're at, if you're a chief people officer, then it's with the other CXOs. If you're the next layer down, even still with those CXOs. But it is, I think I'd even challenge the conversations we're having here. The words we choose determine how we are seen. So if we come in saying we're an enabler and a supporter and a, hey, how can I help you? That is different to, like a culture initiative works when the CXOs, like change is led and managed by people who lead and manage the business every day. So a culture change is led and managed by all of those CXOs, not HR. HR might coordinate it, as you pointed out, Andreas. They might have I've got to make it get organized. And yet the culture change comes because there's a commitment from the leadership and a behavior change and all the things we know. That's a whole nother conversation, a whole nother webinar. But the role that we play is one of, if we want to double the size of our business, then that's the right time for us to say, so what are we going to do with our culture? So those two things are happening like that. And otherwise, some of the HR specific things really are, they feel disconnected from real life. So if we're in those real life conversations, then the OKRs and KPIs and all the performance management is even more reflective of how does an employee connect back to what they do that drives business outcomes. And that makes performance management that much more successful. So I think some of it really is for us to look at, how do we play that role? There was a large, it's the largest private company in the world. I won't name who they are, but they're huge. And their CEO asked all of their 7 business leaders, this is probably about 7 or 8 years ago, what are you doing with the CIO? What innovation plans do you have next year with the CIO? And they were all asked to go have a plan versus giving something over after they'd already made a plan. So Andreas, to your point of bringing HR in and what does collaboration look like, that CEO is expecting the other CXOs and those business leaders to be in lockstep and plan together with all the opportunity. So the ask or the suggestion would be for the chief people person to say to the CEO, getting every other business leader to be like this with HR and say, what is it you need in your business unit? What is it you need in marketing and sales and da-da-da? And back to coming prepared with, I see your turnover is this. I see your performance metrics are that. I see your growth targets are the following. Here's what challenges you've had with turnover or culture or attrition or talent, blah, 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 all the things. But that really becomes where HR is an integral part of whether or not what those plans are and how they can and will occur. And then there's also a lot more shared ownership. And this to me goes to what is co-creation and collaboration. Co-creation, collaboration leads to co-success and co-ownership. And that shared ownership piece by whoever the business partner is of, I've got to make time for my people to participate in X that will grow them, that will build them, that will develop them, that will provide leadership opportunities, all of those things. They then are also on the hook for, and back to your point, Andres, on KPIs for them, they're on the hook for whether or not do you have the right level of development of people in your organization? Do you have the right level of retention in your organization? Retention isn't HR can't make retention happen. We don't manage all the people. If there's crappy managers who the employees don't like, they leave, and they don't leave because HR isn't nice. They're leaving because that manager isn't great. Now, yes, we are tasked with trying to build that manager and grow them. But again, the more we can really legitimately co-create, the more that co-ownership is there and the co-success too. Sorry, Anu, back to you.
All good. So one of the key points I'm picking up right now is really about that conversation, that communication. So one, I think it's really important how we actually introduce ourselves as partners, and how we're actually being viewed. And we all, I think, are on the same page as far as really leaning in on bringing in data so we can actually really take an accurate look of where are we, and then how do we have the conversation on where do we want to be. And one of the things that I found really successful is I always want to make sure that I'm not coming in as a consultant identifying a problem and then sharing what the solution is. I want to hear from my partner, what are they saying, what are they experiencing, what are they challenged with, what are they doing that's actually working really well. We cannot be the eyes and ears in every single nook and cranny of an organization. These are the individuals throughout the business that see this day to day. So it's really important to have their voice in this conversation. And so one of the things that's coming up for me is there's a lot of mindset shifts that are happening and in some organizations still need to happen. So really looking at human resources and not looking at people as resources or assets, but let's actually talk about that people experience. So that's mindset shift number one. Another one really is looking at coming in from that support function to really being commercially aligned so we can be drivers. So for the group, what are some other mindset shifts? This is a two-parter. Question one, what are some other mindset shifts that we want to ensure to support and really be able to change that narrative? And then two, how do you do that? Or how are you doing it right now? So Andreas, we're actually going to go with you.
Oh, you caught me off guard here. I don't know if we can answer number two. I can say what we're doing. I mean, the first thing I will say to answer part one of your question is what mind shift is. to also remember that every single organization will be very different, right? And different approaches will be appropriate for different organizations, right? I mean, it's simple, and yet you see again and again people thinking that one size fits all, right? Is the right thing. There are organizations I've experienced it from a personal perspective. I experienced it coming from highly structured corporate massive organizations to going into chaotic startups, right, that are still finding themselves. And interestingly, in the small organizations, so in the organization where I find myself now, right, it's almost the other way around. I don't have to persuade anybody to co-create. They've done it, right? They've started in their garage, right? And there were 2 people or 3 people in our case co-creating it continuously, day in, day out, day in, day out. That, experimentation is built into our blood, A/B testing, everything is in. So me coming as an HR person, I've almost had to adapt to that and say, yeah, actually, right, I want to be able to co-create as effectively as you. But you should not forget that you also need, right, some other things, right, to avoid co-creation becoming chaotic brainstorming, right? So from our perspective, what I'm doing in the startup scale up world is actually going a step behind and talking to them from my perspective in terms of, okay, so what kind of frameworks, right, work to do proper collaboration, right? What kind of technology, what kind of management tools, techniques, tools, right? Even like basic technology, right? I don't know if you have, do you mind map, right? Where would you do your mind map? Would you just do it on a whiteboard, or can we do it more effectively in something like Miro, right? Where you can store this. So from that perspective, I've had to come in and talk to them about that. So almost rein in that collaboration, right? From when I was at massive organizations, and I'll let Kerry and Zach probably talk a little bit more about that. Right? The approach was completely different, right? There is very top down, right? Leadership heavy, C-level makes all the decisions, and the mind shift there is very different, right? It's almost the opening up versus the closing down. Right? So I'll pass over to Zach. Sorry, no, I'll do it the other way around. Right. So this is I'll go back to Kerry for a perspective, more a bigger organization. But from a small organization, this is what I'm doing to kind of almost structure that collaboration and make it a more structured and organized piece.
I can totally relate to the collaboration because I'm in a 3,000 person organization now versus a 100,000 person organization. So yes, I would actually, I think what the tightrope that everyone has to walk on that first one, actually, Anu, I think is the challenge, because there is a mindset change to being more meaningful. And that's why you have roles in D&I, because organizations are investing in how to look at the experience of an employee. I'm an enormous advocate of employee experience. If I look at hacking HR, we have hundreds of thousands of data points on how to be effective in that space. And it's certainly a focus, I think, for this community. I think when I look at this topic, that isn't that isn't what makes HR win in the room. It's how to actually be as targeted, as committed, perceived as being as committed to the bottom line of the organization. And bottom line to me means that the people are thriving too. It's not A versus B, but it's A with B. But it's demonstrating how people make the bottom line occur, but it's bottom line speech. So I think to your comment of communication, it does go to what are the words that we use, what is the language we're representing, and how do we teach and enable and equip the organization to use different language that incorporates people into the equation more specifically. It's interesting. I was looking in the chat at, being admin doesn't really get you where you want to go. Being a strategic partner is, and if I look at, if I look at the last 10 years, 10 years ago, 25% of CHROs are really trying to be strategic partners. If I look now, that's swung the other way, and there's a handful left behind who are still wanting to be a recipient, and really everyone's asking what we're asking right now. So I don't know that I don't know that the time and place for co-collaboration and co-creation is the time to try to focus on mindset. I think mindset change will be an outcome of demonstrating how we are truly a partner. So Zach, I wanted to give you an opportunity to share too. We're going to just go in all sorts of directions.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and totally agree. I think the thing I would add there is, like, from a mindset perspective, HR and the business units are, certainly co-collaborators, co-creators on setting strategy. What I think sometimes we see often is the business leaders think that they don't actually own the strategy. So, like things like retention efforts and engagement efforts, like it's assumed that HR is owning and driving a lot of that. But to the point that was made earlier, it's the business units, right? The CXOs, the senior executives that own the strategy, own the outcomes, own all of the data points that come along with it. And when I think about how that's actually implemented, it's creating accountability within the performance management process. When we assess our leadership teams, are they actually going out and doing the things that the strategy dictates that they should be doing? We can help them with their set strategy within their different lanes, but it's really making sure that they know they own retention, the retention outcomes. They own development outcomes. They own all these different people-focused outcomes as a leader of their unit, right? So when I think about just the mindset of that, it's all HR again is often seen as the, hey, what do I do? How do I do it? But you own all of these metrics. No, the business owns all of these outcomes from a people perspective. We help enable and equip them to do so.
Zach, I'm going to come back to you on this. So, absolutely, right? We know who the owners are. We're partners in this. And how do you actually have a conversation with someone who is a leader who says, great, these are all the things that I'm doing. I'm overwhelmed. I have so much to do. And I'm looking to you to really help me or actually drive retention because I just have a lot on my plate. We're always moving 100 miles an hour. How do you start to help that leader shift their mindset to what you just shared?
I think a lot of it is really galvanizing their teams. Every company, every organization, every corporation, enterprise, they are not short of any passionate individuals around these spaces. So there are deputies within their chains. There are other staff, different staff levels who put out one email saying, "Hey, I'm putting together a task force to affect change in these specific areas." 100 people raise their hands. There's not a shortage of people who know that these aspects of the business are important. Employee engagement is important. Diversity is important. Inclusion is important. Equity is important. And there is a broad recognition of such facts, right? So building a support team within the business just furthers that agenda. And it really inculcates all of the aspirations that a business has in those spaces. So it's being a leader, championing these efforts, and building a culture team or engagement team, however, whatever that model looks like for the organization. But they have the influence and the authority and really the energy to ensure that they can build out these initiatives and efforts in their businesses, again, in partnership and co-creation with HR.
Yeah. Love that. So, as we talk about how we partner with the business and how we co-create, so Zach, what you're also talking about is how leaders can actually co-create with their teams. When I think about culture, it's not the individual, the leader, or it's not, a CEO who drives that culture. It's actually everybody. So, many years ago, I heard the term culture carrier, and I actually have never liked that term. To me, culture carrier means someone sets the culture and we are all tasked in really living out that culture. So it's not, you don't have that shared responsibility. So the way that I look at culture is we're all culture co-creators. It doesn't matter if it's the person who is making sure that you swiped your badge when you came in, all the way up to the CEO. So role doesn't matter. We all have an impact. We all have that shared responsibility. So Sylvia, I'm seeing in the chat, communication, transparency, and trust are best friends in this. Absolutely. So Andreas and Carrie, anything to Zach's point too around helping leaders co-create with their team to really drive these results. Any thoughts there that you'd like to share?
I can go, Kerry. Yeah, I think Zach's absolutely right. I love the idea of kind of idea champions. There's been a few companies who's tried it very well. I believe I think in the start of the tens or whatever we're calling them. That's a very big coffee chain based in Seattle. They tried idea champions, and that went down as a storm, and many of their creative ideas came out of that. It's important to recognize that a lot of these comes from intrinsic motivation, right? Again, there's a lot of studies around why people like to get involved in collaborative innovation, right? And many studies say that, it's all very, very intrinsic, right? So, recognition, pleasure of actually being able to co-create rather than anything financial, right? And financial rewards. Now, when we flip it back to your question and your example as that leader in the room who is inflexible, and I have to go back to my previous point, which is anything that's measured, right? We need to measure it, right? So if it's measured, right, and it's part of everything that happens, right, for that senior leader, is not just intrinsic, because at lower levels, intrinsic might be enough, but at the top levels, as you say, they have so much going on, right? So at that point, you'd have to build in some extrinsic motivation as well, right? And for me, it goes back to the point that I said: if collaboration, co-creation is part of that leader's performance scorecard, right, which it can be, then that's already a great step forward, right, towards being able to have a conversation around that. Because a lot of our leaders, and it's natural, right, and in HR as well, a lot of our leaders are measured by numbers, right? We measure the success of any business eventually by numbers, right? Whether it's financial numbers or whether it's, Kerry mentioned retention many times, it's still a number, right? It's still a number that we measure, right? So that number can really act as that extrinsic motivation to that leader. Any thoughts, Kerry?
Yeah, like one of the biggest lines on most balance sheets is people. So it's definitely all about the numbers. So when I look at, I work for a process mining company. So we're data driven, and a lot of the conversation I have is really is around facts are friendly. And the more data we can bring, I look at the same kind of data and insight and transparency that organizations look for in the rest of their business, in particular. And I'll take this to other conversations we've had around remote work or hybrid work. What are people doing? Are they doing enough? Are they not doing enough? How are they doing it? How do we support all of that? So metrics are friendly for everyone. They're friendly for the employee to demonstrate that they're adding value. They're friendly for the organization to know that the person is doing the things we hope they're doing or expect them to be doing when they're not with us face to face. So I would say that the embracing data, back to where we started this, and I talked about that survey of where do you pull to the different dimensions of leadership. In each of those cases, the voice and the power and the authority that got added to those respective roles, I'll take the CIO, came with that seat at the table and came with a different level of responsibility and ownership. So some of the opportunity to be that frontline business partner comes with some frontline expectations too. So I think that's also depending on where people came from in their career, what style of person that they are, what role they're used to playing as supporter, helper versus disruptor, I think comes into some of this too. And even then, I would say when I look at who gets hired into HR, who gets HR roles, who's being put into HR leadership roles, it's not necessarily always an HR generalist who's moving up now. It's a business leader who does appreciate this combination of things we're talking about. And similarly, what are the kinds of talent that we're looking for in HR that want to play this role, that want to be that person, who don't want to be just an order taker, they want to be an order creator. So I think that's a consideration too for people in this space, to look at What kind of blend of people do you have on your team? What kind of role do they play, so that you've got that right mix to be in those rooms, in those conversations, in a way that think about where do we want to be, and where do we as a profession capability want to be, and where do us on this call want to be in 1, 3, 5 years? What role do we want to be playing? How do we want to be viewed by all of those business partners as indispensable, and somebody that they wouldn't have that conversation on if we weren't in the room? They'd wait for us. They would say, we can't do that without them here. And that really, to me, success, if all of this comes to life, those conversations of business planning would not be had without us.
Love it, Karen. You very nicely are taking me to my next question. And before I ask you all that next question, so I see that the chat has been super active, and that's wonderful. So we'd also like to hear from our audience if you can actually put in one trait that you think that all HR professionals should really embody. What would that trait be? And then we're going to get to this speed round of questions really soon. So if you can actually share a couple of questions, anything that's coming up for you, if you can share that in the chat, and then we get to ask our lovely panel all of these questions and get as much insight from them as possible. So while the chat's coming through, so Carrie, I'm gonna go back to you because you said this so beautifully. If you think about the traits that people really need for now, for 3 years, for 5 years, if you were to, and I know there's many to choose from, the top 2 or the top 3 traits that all HR professionals really need to embody for us to be commercially aligned, seen as that strategic partner, what might that be? So top 2 or top 3?
I'm reading through what's coming through in the chat. To me, number one, I'd say curiosity. Because there's a lot that HR doesn't know fundamentally. It's a very big generalization. So there's individuals, I'm sure, who are on this call who know lots of things that came from different operational backgrounds, like Andreas did. But I would say curiosity. And the other, I would say, is leadership. So really having the courage. I see some of the courage and leadership comments. Those are the things that I think are going to give you a new voice and a new opportunity and new information. And my last would be preparedness. So back to bringing data, look internally at how you do what you do. Think about how could you be more like, and what content you can bring that is more like the other business leaders, that makes you absolutely all them and a bag of chips, because you're also bringing the people side of it. But curiosity, leadership, courage, and then preparedness.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm seeing a lot of empathy, partnership, active listening, a positive work environment, being collaborative, adaptable, confidence. Absolutely, yes to all of those. So let's keep those comments coming. And then Andreas, we're going to go to you. What do you think those top 2 or top 3 traits should be?
I think this is really interesting because Kerry mentioned 20 minutes ago, like the language that we use is very important, and all I'm seeing again there in the comments is very much HR soft language, right? Empathy, partnerships, support. I'm not sure I like all those. Right? I like all those, right? I think they're important. I'm gonna go back and I mentioned this at the very beginning when I was kind of describing what I think collaboration is. Conflict, right? Conflict in a sense. Don't be afraid to spear conflict, right? If you need to. I think again, remember, collaboration or co-creation is not consensus. We're not here, right, to be able to bring everyone to consensus, right? We have an equal voice as everybody else, and we should not be afraid of conflict, not shy away from it. Courage, so courage in that sense, or courage, I do agree with, right? And yeah, that is the only way for me that co-creation can work, right? Not if we try and keep everybody happy. And the second one for me is, again, I'll have to mention data, and Kerry's already mentioned it, but I'll have to agree. I think analytics is key. Understanding those numbers, which we've already mentioned a lot of times here. Everything is numbers on a balance sheet, right? Like it or not, it is, right? And we must understand them, right? Both the cost of those numbers, the cost of losing those numbers, the cost of gaining those numbers, right? When we talk about heads. So I think it's very, very key that we come to the table with an analytical mindset.
Thank you for sharing that. And what comes to mind when you're talking about conflict for me is really that constructive dialogue. So it's completely fine to disagree. And as Zach, when you were talking about strategic influencing earlier, so for me to be that strategic influencer, it's me coming in and not sugarcoating anything and not really talking about the fluff, but going straight in and saying, being as direct as possible, but also coming in saying I'm here to partner with you so we can actually co-create that solution together. And whenever a lot of people come to me, and I'm sure all of you, for situations that maybe are more on the surface level, so I very quickly get to the underlying factors of that. And so whenever we actually go to those root causes, we're able to create better impact for everyone. And so because of that relationship, I'm able to have more transparent and straightforward conversations, more directed conversations than before. And that relationship has really evolved, where now if there's something that's going on, I'm actually training someone else to also approach that situation the same way. So they're actually looking at root causes versus staying on the surface. So some of the things that I've seen that are coming in the chat. So definitely, as Andreas was talking about, there's more, people focus, more that partnership coaching. So what some people term as those softer skills, I think they're actually very important skills. So I'm going to toss out that phrase softer skills. And then really being data driven and commercially aligned as well. I think there's a lot of great traits that have been mentioned. So Zach, we haven't forgotten about you. So what are the traits that come up for you?
I think you alluded to the kind of the skills based part of it, and this always grinds my gears too when people say hard versus soft skills. But I'm always an advocate for technical versus non-technical, and in that vein. I think technical acumen is actually really important. So in the context of my role is like, what are some DEI impacts on some of the businesses in cybersecurity or marketing or whatever function, right? What is that intersection? And so similarly, what are the HR influences in the marketplace that may impact your business? So talent availability and things of that sort. So I think it's important for us as practitioners to understand what's happening in specific industry spaces so that when we bring those business leaders together, we can come at it from an HR perspective and say, here's what's happening in the broader marketplace, and here's what the downstream effects that could influence your business in the future. And here are some strategies or solutions, ideas on how we can mitigate negative impacts and accelerate and put more energy and investment into some of the accelerants that are going to be like the tailwinds that are going to kind of influence your business positively. So I think technical acumen is one of those things that's often overlooked from an HR perspective.
I'm just going to add one more from the chat. I think proactivity is a big piece of it. In the same way that the other disciplines in our organization are expected to be forward-looking and anticipating market demand, anticipating product change, anticipating, financial change, in the same way as they're expected not to be a reaction to everything, but to proactively do that. I think this is an opportunity really to be a proactive contributor, which might feel like a disruptor, might feel like a challenger, might take courage, might not. But we do have the data of historically what's happening. We do have the data that is coming in the marketplace of talent availability, costs of development, all of those kinds of things. So I think it's incumbent upon us even to knock on the door and say, hey, by the way, I see this coming that you might not have thought about, wherever that might be, rather than even just coming to the room ready for the conversation, starting some of those conversations.
Great, thanks, Carrie. So we've got 7 minutes left. So if anyone wants to ask a question in the chat, feel free to drop it in. And then I'm going to ask the group, can you share a story of where you really focused on co-creation, collaboration, and it swung that situation to the different direction, and you actually got a really positive impact? So obviously no identifying information, but is there a story that you can share so we can actually, instead of just talking about what this looks like, you can actually share an example of what this looks like?
I'll share one. so I'll share one, and I'm not going to contextualize it too much because otherwise I'm going to tell you to do new things. But really, so a large transformation in a large organization, and all of the typical work streams that existed in HR existed in that company. So all of the things we've talked about around talent development and training and enablement and and performance management, all of those, onboarding, all those things that were there were there. And so what we did to co-collaborate was, in this transformation, there were significant shifts across what that meant for each job, how roles were changing, what roles needed to exist, how they would shift and change. It wasn't a big initiative to remove headcount. It was just really looking at how an organization went to market. And so what happened was we co-created and co-collaborated on, for each of those work streams, how did they come to life to support the transformation? So how did the two things really coexist? So rather than HR at the start of its year planning and saying, this is what we're going to do this year, and they have a plan for their work streams, and the project being over here, and then throwing things over the fence and that disrupting whatever those plans were, we together actually sat and said, okay, what does this program mean to the organization? What will it mean in the next 6, 9, 12, 18, 24 months? And how does that materialize in each of those work streams? So there were independent, proactive initiatives by HR of things that they wanted to do and capabilities they wanted to create in the organization, and also specific activities and deliverables related to this big program that became activities and deliverables that sat within the HR responsibility as well. And so that, to me, is really an example of how, instead of it being, this is happening, and throwing a wish list over or a requirements list over, it was really a co-creation and collaboration on, when we're done, what does it look like for us? Rather than this and us and them. So that's an example of one that we did. And then each of those HR people, and it was a larger organization, they then looked at how did that manifest in their respective geographies or business areas or with their different teams. And some of them, like many, there's some vertical and cross-functional roles in HR. Same thing, those then applied to how to make that materialize for them. I'll turn it to the gentleman.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Carrie. So we only have a few minutes left. So now I'm going to give you each 60 seconds. What is one piece of advice to help HR professionals, people, team members, to really be able to embody co-creation and collaboration? And Zach, I'm coming to you first.
I think a lot of it hinges on understanding the business fully, right? Is understanding your stakeholders. What are their goals versus what are the enterprise goals versus what the HR goals are, and how do you blend them all together? So again, being very strategic in that sense, in the approach of bringing all these different stakeholders, executives together and say, here are your business goals. Here's how HR influences those business goals, and using technical vernacular, using business vernacular, being very kind of astute on what's happening in the marketplace and how that's going to influence all the business goals internally. It's got to be understanding the business and having some of that technical acumen that I mentioned.
Wonderful, thank you. And Andreas, we're going to go to you next.
I think I'll just recap. I think Zach's put it very well. I'll recap everything that we've just said. I think, first of all, understand what collaboration is truly, right? Understand the processes it needs, the process, the system, the structure. And then at the same time, don't be afraid to let go of all of that, right? To go in with a completely free mind, as we mentioned, conflict or whatever you want to call it, right? And truly let go. And don't be afraid of, chaos underpinned by structure and underpinned by really, really good analytical background as well, understanding the data.
Wonderful, thank you. And Carrie, you're going to close this out for us.
Find a friend. Find a friend. Not everyone will want to do this with you. Not everyone will believe in you or believe that you're going to do it. So while you do all that preparedness, you do all the things, you come with the data, find a friend, have a success, and then multiply.
Love it. Love it. So thank you all. Thank you, audience, for being here. Thank you, panelists, for being here. And I think all of this, we do so much. We do this because we care, and so it's really finding ways for us to be more effective, more strategic, and really being able to get us the results that we're trying to co-create with other people. And all of this, what Carrie just said, find a friend. If that friend might not even be within your organization, reach out to the Hacking HR community. Reach out to all of us on this panel as well. So we're all in this together and we can make a greater impact together. So thanks, everyone.